So, welcome, Kathryn Muller. It's good to see
Hi.
you. We haven't seen one another for a couple of months because we've both been very busy doing other things. But we first met when I joined your initiative, which is called EduCAN. And so I'm interviewing you today so you can share with us what you've experienced in the last 6 to 8 months as being the founder of the EduCAN. But before we start, if you can just give us a little bit of background about yourself and your role in education.
Sure. I'm a teacher, trained in foundation phase teaching, and I trained in 2015, so I've been teaching for the last few years. I worked in KZN for a few years, taught primarily grade 1, which I loved, and I'm currently teaching in a preschool position, so working with younger children, ranging between like 3 and 6 years old, which is something I've also really wanted to do, and I'm very happy to have straddled both of those learning areas. Yeah, that's basically it.
That's you. Okay. So experience in foundation phase, which we know is a very, very important phase, critical, and hence there's a lot of national and global focus on what happens in those early years. And we've spoken at length at other times about your work in the foundation phase, and we hope that in the future we'll come back to speaking about that again, maybe via an interview, which I think would be useful for many people. But for today, if you can maybe just speak about the EduCAN and start off by telling us what it is and why you started it.
Yeah, so I feel a little nervous about, not uncomfortable, but nervous about the sort of idea of like founding. Okay. But I did start the WhatsApp group, okay. Although it was a collaborative thing from the beginning. What happened was that I joined the kind of CAN movement.
You want maybe just explain the CAN movement? It stands for Community Action Network, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I saw it on social media. It was a call for people to kind of put themselves forward as neighbors to kind of network within their local community, to try and work out specific local ways to respond to the COVID lockdown. So the idea was you'd kind of get pooled into a community group based on your suburb, based on your residential location, and that you would just meet those people online and start to plan how you would work together and what kind of problems you could address. So I was part of the Kenilworth CAN from the beginning, but there was always a lot of cross communication. Like we'd get messages from other CANs. We kind of very quickly became aware of what other groups were doing. And I came into contact with Joni, who was, I think, part of the Tafelsig CAN and a sort of leader in that CAN. And she found out I was a teacher and messaged me one day early on to say, parents are messaging her to say, what am I going to do with my kids? Like just this stress that parents were feeling. And she was getting all these messages. And she picked me. I don't know if at that stage it was the only teacher that she had met, but he said, what can we do about this? And I said, well, my experience as a teacher of a fairly privileged school was that my parents were also full of anxiety and also kind of were worrying about it and asking for help. And that I saw, I already could tell, I'd done 2 weeks, I think, of remote learning already. So I already had a sense of it. And I thought, well,
and what stage was this? What time?
This was probably early April.
Early April.
Very early April. We went into we started remote learning immediate, just a few days prior to lockdown officially starting. We kind of got the gist and started. So yeah, I thought parent support, that's where it's at. That was my intuition, is let's just reach out to parents in a personal way, and find out what they feel they need, like try and find out what it is what these anxieties are there, and then are there ways that that teachers could come on board, who have the energy, the capacity, who, you know, feel that they can come on board and support parents in some way, and in that way support students.
Okay.
So that was the thinking. And we basically, he kind of asked, or got people interested, and we launched the group with a short description, which was basically like, parents can ask teachers for help, kind of thing, like, parents, like, let us know what your needs are. And within a few days we had over 100 participants from probably mostly her neighborhood, but it spread quickly and it was from all over Cape Town. Yeah. And then
that
also
was on a WhatsApp. It was a WhatsApp group.
On a WhatsApp group, yeah. And also very quickly teachers coming on board and people with different educational experience as well. And then some students, mostly obviously older students, like matric students. And it was lots of people asking for resources, asking for support, and it was a bit of a whirlwind and a flood, and it was like a lot of communicating, basically, for many weeks. Yeah.
So what kinds of, you said people were asking for resources, correct? So what kinds of resources were you sharing, and how was that sharing happening? Maybe you can just speak to that.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting question. I mean, that's one of the first conversations, you know, we had actually. So at the very beginning, it was, you know, immediately there was this divide that you know, showed up across South Africa around the digital divide. And so what people were asking for were online resources. And, you know, we quickly discovered that they were available. A lot of portals did make their things available for free. There was you know, this emergence of like data-free sites, and you know, there was a lot of stuff out there. And in a way, the EduCAN became a little bit of a portal in itself. Like, people would share links, and we started to kind of organize them so that people could kind of find them easily.
Where did you organize them? Did you do that via
Google
Drive?
Yeah. So that was one part of it. But obviously that's not the whole story. And the truth is that access to internet is an issue. And it's not something we were able to really deeply or specifically address through the EduCAN, but we started to partner with an organization, Outliers, who were trying to distribute physical learning materials to learners. And that was another kind of spin-off that we got involved in. And then the other thing that I did, felt right to me, and other people started in their own way, was more along the lines of kind of like guidance or consultation, or kind of more direct advice. So there were people who were offering Zoom classes. There were people who were, you know, directly tutoring kids online. I started like a subgroup, which was for foundation phase specifically. We asked a lot for parents to share with us what age their child was, like what grade they wanted help with. And then I kind of pooled those parents together, invited them to a private group, and that group also shared resources, but it was a lot more focused, and the teachers on that group were really focused on guiding parents in practical, resource limited, home-based things you could do with your kids to keep them learning, that was fun and that was child friendly, you know. So you don't need all these books, you don't need all of this stuff. Like, let's just get what's in your house, you know, let's just cut up some cardboard, let's just, you know, go outside, like, let's look at the nuts and bolts of it.
And was that advice being given to parents of children from across all phases and all age groups, or was it?
This was preschool and foundation phase. So this was based on my expertise, and then I joined by chance with, you know, more teachers joined me and were interested and kind of got involved. So yeah, that was another part of it.
Were there more groups for other phases, so for 4 to 6, 7 to 9, and 10 to 12? And were you involved in them at all, or did you have any kind of insight into what was happening in those?
So to be honest, that was something that didn't really pan out. At the very beginning, I really hoped for it, and I contacted teachers, you know, and there were a few times when, I mean, there was a bit of a murmur, like I had some teachers in high school who were specific subject teachers, and they were interested in trying to kind of form groups. And maybe it happened, but in the end I wasn't involved and didn't get sort of wind of it. So
Sure.
there wasn't anything else specifically for other phases that I'm aware of.
I also haven't heard of anything, which is why I asked. I've only been aware of what you did.
Except having said that, that's not entirely true necessarily, because at a certain point in the process, maybe around May or June, so quite late in the lockdown, a whole lot of Telegram groups emerged.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, and they actually started also as WhatsApp groups, and they were massive WhatsApp groups. They were way bigger than the EduCAN, where there was one group for each grade, and even there would actually be more than one. There would be like one group that would fill up with 250 teachers, and then another group would be formed. And those were teacher groups where they shared resources. And then they moved to Telegram, and I believe there's still groups active on Telegram.
That include parents, or that are still teachers sharing resources?
So, this is the thing. So my understanding is that they're teacher groups. I was on a group like that for a while, and I found it incredibly overwhelming with the flood of resources that weren't necessarily curated or targeted or necessarily that well thought out. And for me, it was a bit overwhelming. But having said that, there have been, I can't name them, but there've definitely been some parent support groups that have popped up that have with invites. So people have said, come and join this group, and they're on Facebook and different platforms. So like the idea is spread a little, and maybe wider than I know,
Sure,
I hope it has.
No, for sure. And when I spoke with Travis Peterson, whom I met via the EduCAN, he initially, when I spoke with him, he also referred me to Telegram groups. But you're my first port of call, so I haven't spoken to any of them yet about what the experience was. But it's an idea I have to actually go and find out what happened in those very large groups, and how they, what their experience has been, also of managing such a large group, and as you say, of managing uncurated resources, and whether or not at some point those will become curated. What I'm aware of, obviously, is the curated resources that are already provided, for instance, by the WCD. And my understanding was that was a data-free site, but perhaps I'm incorrect about that.
I have a bit of insight into that, because I spoke to someone from the WCD who was a teacher, but also an IT person who was working on the back end of it. And he basically said that the portal itself, my understanding was that the portal itself, where you could go and click on things, was data free. But then as soon as you clicked out of it, and if
you get someone's link to another site, then that's always the problem.
Then it would cost. So unless you've got a site like what's the one, Khan Academy, that was like literally the site itself is data free, it wouldn't be data free in the end. So it was tricky. And I think the WCD did have specific data free resources available, but it wasn't that every single connection on their portal was data free. You know what I mean? So we were discussing even that Travis's education portal could kind of be linked to the WCD and become data free. And this guy, his name I suddenly can't remember, he basically said like it wouldn't be like that. Like it would still,
there are limitations.
So that was that.
What the WCD did do was produce those posters that provided an outline and provided resources in a very digestible format, which I understood was being circulated via WhatsApp. But I wondered also whether or not those would then not be accessible to people who don't have a smartphone. And so, for the many, very, very many parents who only have access, and households that only have access to what is called a feature phone, there's that added constraint. So it's a challenge that, I'm sure people are looking at, but obviously there are always limitations, right? So based on your experience thus far, because you're still involved in EduCAN, and obviously it's, the intensity of your involvement has changed, as has everyone's over time, because people went back to school. So there was less pressure on those kinds of groups,
Yeah.
on the one hand, and on the other hand, there's just less time when one is going
Yeah.
back to one's full-time work. But what benefits are you aware that participants have received, including yourself, perhaps, as as a participant?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, like there has been a change in kind of energy and intensity in terms of what's been going on, and so I would, for me, it's become quite clear that it was not localized, not only in terms of like a neighborhood involvement, but localized what's the word, in time,
Temporarily.
right? Like, yeah, exactly.
It was
Like
it was temporary in some ways.
yeah, and what it was then was about connection and feeling like I had a feeling based on how many messages I would receive and would reply to, because it's just something that it was my intuition, which was like, if someone writes to you, you write back, and you're authentic, you know what I mean? And so I hope what I gave to people was a lot of authenticity and connection and kind of just being there and and if I couldn't help, trying to find a way to help, trying to kind of give accurate information or transfer someone to someone else to be able to kind of support them in some way. And I think that was happening broadly. I don't think I was alone in having that approach. I think it was something that emerged out of that time of aloneness and isolation in lockdown, that people kind of reached out more in
Yes.
many ways. And so I hope that was a benefit. And I haven't had as many messages over the last number of months, and I've made a few connections that have lasted. Like this, I've made some friends from this time, and people who I'm still in touch with. And there's people who I hope I can work with again, and can kind of feel almost like a collegiality with,
Sure.
that we've worked together. Um, but I also understand that there was not a limit, but like that it had its time, in the sense of, well, kids have gone back to school, parents are now being able to look more to their children's own teacher,
Sure.
rather than needing a group like this. But we've asked, especially with the preschool group, we've asked repeatedly over the months, like, should we close the group? Like, do people still need it? And people haven't it's been a bit vague, but like no one said like, no, let's just leave it. Like, people have said, let's keep it open, because just in case, like, you never know, right? So there
And
it
what
is.
I
It's still there.
notice as a silent member of EduCAN is that there are still many messages that come through every week where people are requesting something or sharing some information. So from the outside, it really does seem to still serve some function. Perhaps that's changed. Now it's more, well, what is the change, in terms of types of information that is being shared or are being shared?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be completely honest. There was a point around, I can't even remember when it was, but there was a point when I hit a bit of a ceiling, and I was busy trying to, I had my finger in a lot of pies. I was very involved in the Kenilworth CAN itself. I was trying to make connections between the Kenilworth CAN and the Manenberg CAN. We were forming a partnership, and I was trying to get the education side of that to connect, because there were lots of schools in Manenberg, and Outlives was trying to send resources there, and I was trying to raise money for them. And when I finally like ticked that off, and like we got those station resources out there, and I'd like managed to raise funds for like printer ink, and I just like almost collapsed. Like, like not
huge
literally,
intensity.
I was like, I
for such a
can't,
long
like,
period of
what
time.
more is there, and now I've gone off track. What I wanted to bring back to what you said, sorry.
It
Oh, you
happens to
asking
me
about like
often.
what's happening now? Yeah.
In terms of
Um,
types of information that,
yes, right. And and shortly after that, like the schools reopened, and there was a shift, anyway.
mm,
And so to be honest, I stopped obsessing about
mm,
every single day, like what I could be sharing, what I like, this responsibility that I had, which I felt that I had once I'd started the group, to be of service,
yes.
and to be useful. So, and I don't know if other people felt that as well, but there was pressure on those who'd kind of taken it upon themselves to try and be of service and to try and put information out there. um there was there was a feeling, whether it was exactly true or not, but a feeling that like it wasn't asked of us as much,
Sure.
and or required.
Mm,
And so the shift has been just to something that was more kind of incidental.
mm,
And yeah, and so what I was going to say is, to be honest, I thought at a point of closing the group
mm,
down, and sort of like kind of, or rather kind of curtailing it and saying, well, it's done its job, let's
mm.
kind of close it. And then I discovered that you can't close WhatsApp groups.
I had no idea.
I know. So this is big news. You actually can't delete a WhatsApp group. You can only leave it. And so this has puzzled me and troubled me a little, because I don't know if I want to leave and then not know where it goes, because then you leave responsibility, but you still started it.
Mm,
What accountability would I have, if it like changed in a way that made me very uncomfortable, like that I
One
didn't,
never
I
knows.
didn't,
Yes, of course. If one
and
leaves.
yeah.
Yeah.
So so I felt like there's two options, right? Like either it's basically its future has to emerge. It's become an emergent thing. There's no
Mm,
other option for it. Like either people will leave it and it will slowly just fizzle into nothing, to a point where I can say, right, guys, can you leave the group? And we're gonna, or I say, right, guys, we're renaming this group, or
mm, mm,
we're shifting our focus. Like, it may change form, but
mm.
basically it exists now.
And you can't leave it. Very
I didn't
interesting.
I didn't
Yeah.
know I was doing that.
I had no idea. I had no idea. It's good to know that actually before I set up another WhatsApp group. I'll definitely think
Yeah.
about that and put a disclaimer when one sets it up, right? That's a big learning. I mean, my next question was going to be, what have you learned from this? So that's a very interesting learning curve, and one that one normally thinks one will only have that kind of ongoing responsibility when one starts something that is a fully fledged organization, for instance, and then has
Right.
to have formal handovers. But when one's doing something, on the spur of the moment, because that's how
Yeah.
people were responding during
Yeah.
COVID, and that feels relatively informal because it's a WhatsApp group, which is something we carry around in our hand. We don't anticipate the kind of what's the correct expression, longevity of the accountability that goes with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
quite onerous. I mean, you could find somebody to hand it over to. There's that option as well. So,
Yeah.
and perhaps
Yeah.
when you reach a point where you feel that you're not adding value, and it's not adding value for you to be there, then perhaps there would be somebody else, who's keen to do that.
For sure.
Hmm.
I mean, it also feels kind of harmless.
Yes, no,
And
it's a wonderful
there
group.
are
I mean, it pops up on my screen every time someone shares something. It's
exactly.
lovely, really, very
And
useful.
there are people who I, could approach in that sense, if
Hmm.
needed be. But I mean, what I'm more interested in is seeing, like, it's sort of curiosity, and I'm happy to leave it at that,
Hmm.
like to see like what does happen. I mean,
Hmm.
what
Hmm.
does next year hold? We don't know,
We
and
don't
and
know. Hmm.
and it does, my intuition is, and I think this is what people have kind of like suggested, not on the EduCAN, because that group is big and we haven't posed it as a question, but on the foundation phase group, it's feeling like, well, let's not just throw it away. Like let's because these times are still uncertain. We don't know exactly how it's going to pan out. We don't know if there are going to be more lockdowns, or even things that are like that or different. Who knows? It's just yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would like very much to hear, what else you've learned from the experience. One of the things that have come up for me and other people, with whom I've been liaising around community work has been that one of the primary learnings is that what was there already was highlighted. So any challenge that existed was now highlighted. And so, I'm very interested to see what ongoing needs that were expressed during COVID will continue to be expressed because they always existed, but there wasn't an avenue by means of which they could be expressed by ordinary citizens, by ordinary individuals, parents directly to teachers. You aren't necessarily the class teacher because normally that's the route, right? So it will be very interesting from that point of view to see, do people continue to express needs? Do parents continue to express their needs for support? And then what types of needs continue to be expressed? But what else have you learned during the time that you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, just commenting on, like, responding to what you're saying about what you say, like what parents like ask for and what parents request. Like one of the big gaps that got bigger, one of the things for me that the groups showed is this almost alienation that parents can experience about their children's learning. And this idea that you like send your child to the teacher, send your child to school because you can't do that job. And of course, in many ways that is a factor, right? Like it's teaching as professionalized to the point that's a big part of our current social reality. But especially in the foundation phase and early childhood, trying to get back to this idea that no, you can, and that parents, that to empower parents to kind of to take charge of their ability to like support their child and teach them the skills they need to learn was huge, and I'm not alone in that. Like, and I was influenced by actually, like, from further back from like other research that I've done and like other some interested around the role of parents in education. Like that was something I was thinking about before. And so I was always going to be an advocate for it. But I do think that it really showed up in a big way that that parents felt had been left out and were now asking by sheer emergency, like by the necessity, were asking to be included again, were asking to be let in. And so that was definitely something that's, I mean, it was something that I learned how to kind of be more active in, rather than just reading, you know what I mean? It became more actual rather than intellectual, if that makes sense.
Yes, whereas one knows the theory, but also one doesn't maybe have capacity nor an impetus to actually address, that particular challenge, which we know is a massive challenge. And it's interesting.
And I mean,
you go, and then I'll.
I think capacity is an interesting word. I mean, like one of the things, I mean, I can be, I don't know what the word is. Basically, like when lockdown hits and like I was teaching from home, I was not driving to Bloberg every day. I lost I gained like an hour and a half of my day, minimum, never mind kind of the weird scheduling and like just how things panned out. I felt like I had tons of time that I could give to people. And I didn't, I mean, I had it, but I was working all day long. Like I worked into the evenings. It was intense, but I had the energy for it and I had the will to do it, and I was there for it, like that was fine by me. So that capacity, I had it, and it kind of dwindled.
Well, as you had to go back to work in Bloberg and do the commute and focus more intensely on the children in in your class. So
Yeah.
so you mentioned the exclusion of parents, and obviously depending on whom one speaks to in any stakeholder group, the perspective will either be, someone has been excluded or has excluded themselves to some extent. So with some teachers, when I've spoken with them, the parents just don't show up. They're not interested. Sometimes when I speak with parents, we don't get any information. There are no opportunities to connect with the school. And obviously this differs from parent to parent within a specific school, as obvious, as well as from one environment to another, one school environment to another. So I am very interested in the dynamic that creates exclusion, whether it's because teachers are not finding the time to include parents or don't really know how to include parents, because parents aren't at school, they're working often. And so how does one actually include them except to send the homework home and hope that they can actually do provide that kind of assistance, or bring them into the classroom and, on specific days of the year or via other kinds of events. I mean, that's normally how parents are included. But there are very few NGOs who focus specifically on parents. Much of the work in improving education outcomes still focuses very, very heavily on the teacher, who, based on research I've done, will often say, there's only so much more I can do here, there's only so much more training I can go on, I'm not the only answer. And then, of course, there are also the statistics that say what happens in the class is the definitive thing that either makes or breaks the learning journey of an individual child or group of children. So I will also be interested to see.
It's both of those, right?
Say again.
It's like it's both of those. It's going to be interconnected.
Yes.
It's not all parents.
It's not all parents and it's not all teachers. However, the research I've read, and I'd love to know, if there's stuff that debunks it, does say that the greatest point of leverage is what's happening in the classroom. That's the critical point. And so I do understand, therefore, why when people are trying to improve systemic outcomes, they go into the classroom first, right? It makes sense. However, I also know, as do the people who are working, at a system level, also know that we have to bring parents in some way. And how then, obviously, I mean, there are massive questions in societies such as ours, where there's such massive inequality in terms of resources and hence capacity. Because it's much easier if you're a parent who doesn't have to work all day to spend more time with your child. And also, if you're a parent who doesn't have to work all day, very often you're a parent who has some other kind of form of income or support in your life. So these are obviously very difficult questions that everyone continues to wrestle with. But what will be curious to observe, because I also plan just to stay in the EduCAN, and maybe at some point, depending on what happens next year, I could contribute more actively, is what emerges in terms of ongoing needs that are expressed by the parents who participate. Because
that would be fascinating.
Yeah, it is fascinating. So in your experience, there were parents who were mainly asking for resources and online resources, and then you in the foundation phase can metamorphose that into saying, okay, well, this is what you can actually do at home, because the foundation phase curriculum lends itself to that kind of teaching and learning experience.
Yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, that's what it was. I mean, something that I again tried to do at the beginning and succeeded to an extent was to try and find out not who people were. I mean, sometimes in a personal sense, like I did connect with a lot of people. I've saved so many contacts to my phone and to my email account. Like I made sure that I had people personally, who I knew who they were, and it wasn't just random numbers all over my phone. But also trying to find out, like, are you a parent? Are you a teacher? Like those were the kind of main things, and so we would kind of know. And in the end, like at the moment, I don't have a breakdown. Like I can't say there's 150 members, 100 are parents, 50 are, like, I don't know what that is. All I know is that at the beginning, the big rush of people who had joined the group were mostly parents.
Okay.
And then there was the teachers who followed. And but by now it may be more educated, like the balance may have shifted. There may be more educators. I don't know. I haven't gone back into it to find out. And that's something that I may do in the new year, perhaps, like just to be like, let's reset, guys, come in there, and I'll try and actually find out more, so that in whatever way I can, in a way that I feel I can manage to move things forward, so that we can kind of plan and organize in an effective way, because that for me is critical. I mean, and if anything, like I want to be a communicator, I want to be a planner and an organizer in the education space, in the future. You know, that's something that for me, this, I hope this is a precursor for. Yeah.
So when you
I don't know
say
if
you
that
want to
answers.
be a communicator and planner and organizer, what do you mean by that? I'm not sure. I
Yeah,
understand
so
that.
I mean, so I guess the communication part is what I said earlier around being an authentic communicator, being able to actually, um, yeah, sort of talk and connect with people in the way that hopefully that they would need, and that really helps. And then the organizing has to do with, I guess networking, which was already a very big part of this experience, was making, like, who have I connected with already, who have I communicated with, who I can connect to somebody else, you know, how do I actually almost spread this web of connection between people. And weirdly, I found that I did that quite well, which I didn't necessarily know that I would do. But I was, yeah, I was very quick to be able to, like, oh, well, so and so, and like, oh, this person said this, and so let me try this connection. And a lot happened that way, like a lot emerged from just doing that. So it was communicating, connecting people up, and then from there we managed to literally make things happen, you know, like that wouldn't have happened otherwise. So
Absolutely. And
that
at
was
speed as well.
great. Yeah. So that's, you know, not necessarily, yeah, I mean, that no matter what kind of work I do in the future in education, I assume, I think those are more like philosophies, I guess. You know, it's like a kind of a philosophy around like how I would approach doing meaningful work, as opposed to kind of top down, like, I'm deciding to do this, let me do this, and just like barge in somewhere, right? So I guess that's the thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, what I noticed during COVID is that, you know, the necessity for collaboration was highlighted, and then the willingness to collaborate
Yeah,
came to the fore. So
for
those,
sure.
you know, in those groups where the participants were willing to collaborate and then, you know, obviously adjust, and things happen very quickly. And I think the cans are an excellent example of that. That kind of, you know, collaboration that then was able to really make a significant impact on people's daily lives during a very, very, very traumatic set of
Yeah.
experiences that, you know, not only had very negative education outcomes, but also, you know, I mean, the food crisis that many of the cans have helped to address and are doing on an
Yeah.
ongoing basis. I mean, it's actually incredible work. It really is.
I mean, I felt pretty humbled throughout this experience.
Absolutely. Me too.
I, I've connected with some kind of giants, giants of people who've done so much and have, I mean, I may have felt exhausted and felt like at the, you know, at the end of my reach, and then I would look at the people around me who just, and you talk about capacity, right? Like, who seemed to have this like overflow of capacity to be able to do what they're doing. So I mean, they really have been incredible kind of people that involved, who I've happened to kind of connect with in various ways, both on the education side and in the kind of local neighborhood side. Which yeah, I mean, it was great to, this may not be quite what, I don't know, it was great to feel like in this kind of weird kind of emergency situation where nothing is certain, and that could happen again and will happen again in this very terrifying, uncertain sort of global time we're in. I want to be with the people who are going to act
Yes,
and organize,
absolutely.
and feeling this kind of, almost the whole time was happening, this intense relief that I had managed to dive in to the group of busybodies who were like so insistently reaching out, but also authentically, respectfully, kind of mindfully
Yes, the mindfulness.
doing the work, and not, as I said before, like bulldozing. I didn't feel like I was part of some kind of big, I don't know, saviorism kind of project, and that worked for me.
Well, I think, I mean, at community level, when one actually can arrive as one's authentic self and just offer as much help as one is able to offer based on what skills or resources one has, and to offer it, and then if it's not what's needed, to let it go, rather than, where we sometimes see maybe where there is a mission, or a vision that's quite set in stone. It is much more difficult for the information that everything that's been offered is not needed to come back. Right. So I also have sympathy for large organizations, for instance, who have to have missions and visions and then set a particular path and follow it, and then look at the data in order to understand how they need to adjust. It is easier as an individual as well to arrive and say, hey, I can do this today, I can do that this week, and this is what I have today. I have these 7 resources on my computer, and they're not copyrighted, so I can send them to you.
Yes.
And that's amazing. And that, I mean, that's incredible. But if you're a very large organization, obviously, you don't have that kind of leeway, and the expectations of you are quite different. So I feel, I feel empathy or sympathy
definitely.
for people in those positions who are, I think, also well-meaning and doing the best they can. So based on where you're at the moment, both personally, right? You're an individual, you have life, and you need nurture as well. So no one can give to others, indefinitely without receiving some rest, at least in between, as well as, the uncertainty around the future in education because of, the future of how the COVID pandemic unfolds. What do you want to do with the EduCAN? What do you want to do with the EduCAN?
That's a good question. And the short answer is that I don't know yet. I don't, I haven't had room for that yet. But what I can say is, gosh, no, I'm going, sorry. You said, sorry, I'm blank.
Don't worry, I go blank often.
There's just a phrase I wanted to pick up on what you just said around where on the future. Okay, sorry, I might wobble a little bit.
Just say whatever, it's just be your authentic self. This is a very, very low key kind of me who is no one interviewing you who's done something at a local level. So
personally, you mentioned the personal. Personally, I have not got like a career plan laid out, but I do have, I guess, sort of maybe some like guiding principles and some kind of ambitions is not the right word either, but I mean, ideas about how I would like to conduct myself, and like the kinds of impact I would like to, make in my
Or
career. And a
career
big
needs,
part,
maybe, rather than ambitions.
perhaps, yeah, exactly.
Mm,
And a big part of that is an awareness around my own, well, again, capacity and then limitations and how those play into each other. And so what happened, I think if I think about it, like COVID started and I felt this room in myself, this capacity to kind of help on this immediate level in terms of kind of connecting and reaching out to parents and connecting with other teachers. And that all happened in those few months. And then I really was swallowed back into school work, into my own job. And I had to, it's the first year I'm doing this job. So this has been a crazy year for me as a teacher in a new job.
Absolutely.
And I had to get back to that
Mm.
and take my role as literally as a preschool teacher sort of serious. Not that I wasn't taking it seriously during COVID, but like getting back into that in a big way. And I take my personal work, my work in the classroom incredibly seriously. And for me, like the whole, when I went into education, I was interested in kind of, I was interested in learning and kids and like being in the classroom, but I was interested first of all in the structural stuff. Like I was interested in the big picture of education. And I decided I have to be in the classroom first. Like my route has always been to start small and move big, in terms of my practical experience. So like I wanted to know what it was like to teach in a classroom. I wanted to get good at that. I wanted to have those skills. So that's always a thread for me. It's going to be there. So having said that,
The
that's
thread
been
being your interest in the structural
how I'm
issues,
gonna
or how you're going to your
how I
pathway.
move. Yeah, exactly. So I'm in the classroom now, and that's what I'm doing. But I'm not going to shut the door on Education Can. And when I feel that room again, because it's literally about capacity and patience. When I feel that room again, I will hopefully open a new door and or kind of revisit it and be able to say to people, well, what I'm having this idea, or I'm wondering about this, or ask a question like, what do people want? Can we help? Basically open it up again. But the other part of that is, I, in being a teacher, and you do a lot of alone learning when you're a teacher. Like a lot of the time, you get trained and then you get to the classroom and it's like you drown and you have to learn how to do it on your own a lot. Like obviously you got support, hopefully, and I've had a lot of support, but a lot of the time, a lot of it is on your own. And so I'm very big on training, and I'm very big on kind of having your hand held to a certain extent. And so in a way, what I feel like, apart from wanting to be a teacher, is if I'm going to go forward into the structural, organizational kind of bigger picture side, I have to do that with guidance. So what I'll be looking for is actually my teachers.
Yes.
If that makes sense. And so, if it does continue or morph into something else, I think the next step for me would be further training for myself, would be some kind of capacity building, like actually, where do I go next with this, that I can really feel like I'm leveling up kind of before I dive into sort of community-oriented work again in a significant way, so that it can be more sustainable. Like it's basically, I need to kind of become not bigger or better or whatever, like it's not about that, but I need to kind of
to
get
acquire more skills and knowledge, and support,
exactly.
to maybe expand the support system
Yes.
that you can then lean back into, or lean on while you grow something.
So that's my roundabout way.
No, I think it's a lovely answer, because it's authentic and it's great, and I enjoy speaking with you so much, because you are so authentic and so open, and I really appreciate that. As I'm sure will anyone who watches us have this conversation. We live in hope. I think the EduCAN people will at least watch our conversation.
And
definitely share it with them.
For anyone who does, as I said, like I'm feeling smaller and smaller, and that's again the feeling of like, at the beginning, when I was overwhelmed with messages, and again, still feeling small, still feeling like, okay,
Mm.
well, I need to find a little way, a little way, a little way, a little way, a little way to help and connect, and you know, that was part of it. And now I just feel sort of smaller and smaller and smaller, but being okay with that. And this kind of ego is like, well, yeah, I'm literally just a teacher.
I mean,
So
my
what?
experience, you know, is, and it was both, you know, doing community work, but in other, you know, aspects of in my professional life as well. So when I, you know, was doing some community work, and even now, because it's ongoing in a very small way, I just kept showing up and saying, well, I'm just here to try to connect people, and to connect the people who obviously are way more competent than me. And so my mission today, I say this to someone when I was speaking to them, because, you know, imagine in the first week, I mean, we were all just endlessly communicating, right? Are you the more competent than me at this, you know, than I am at this? And I really hope you are, because there is this need. So would you take this on? And then tell me how I can support you in an ongoing way. Do you need another person who can help? Let me go and find that person. But I also had the experience of when you are the first to show up and say, let's gather together, people kind of think that you must have a huge vision and that you can. And I kept saying, no. These are my very, very, very basic ideas. They may all be wrong. And where I think I could help everyone best. And once I've, you know, helped gather whoever by networking and, you know, and performing that role, I'll just document. You know, I'll just go back into a little corner and I'll just write things down, because that's probably what I'm best at, right? So I totally understand that feeling of being small and of wanting to remain small in it. Because I definitely am most comfortable when I can work with others who allow me to be in a position of equal humility, if that like we're all equally humble here. And I'm most comfortable when I can be facilitating others. I don't know what your take is on what I've said about how I approach that.
No, I think that was quite a beautiful way of kind of encapsulating it and describing
it. Does it resonate for you? Is that similar for you?
Yeah, it does. I mean, not identically, but certainly, yeah, I mean, it does. And I wouldn't be surprised again if a lot of people would feel that a little bit. I mean, again, going back to this idea of the humility and the kind of the humility of an attitude, but also the I want to say go-getters suddenly, like this group of people who would like really
all the drivers,
really like moved into the space and started working straight away. And I, as much as I'll say, like, I was amazed at people around me who just seemed to have so many skills and was such like so well connected and had all of this. I think they would also possibly describe themselves as small and just part of a piece. Like people like there weren't a lot of big egos around, but like that, you know, that was my experience, was that I didn't see a lot of like, I'm coming in here, I'm the one who's doing this, I'm the person who's at the center. You know, no one was centering themselves really. Like, I mean, I'm sure they were, but not within what the work, not within what I was.
Which may also, you know, what is the true meaning of Ubuntu? It's a value system, right? And one of those, you know, how one gives to others, how one loves others as you love yourself, because that ethos, you know, is integral to the concept of Ubuntu. Without being humble is a question, right? And there's relief in it, you know, because if one has to be, you know, the leader that everyone looks to, well, that kind of pressure is what kills people in the end. Stress. I met with someone else recently who's done amazing support work in another type of initiative. And I said to her, I asked her to speak about her own self-caring practices, because that is something I think that people who do community work need to hear about from others, because it is an issue. People do burn out. And she said, I let go of the outcome. And
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah, very wise, I thought. Let go. Do what you can.
Yeah.
Offer what you can. Provide the idea and then let go of the outcome. I thought that was very, very wise advice.
Wise.
Which I was like, okay, how many times am I not letting go of the outcome? And that's why I'm stressed, right? So it was a wonderful reminder, although I know that theory, I definitely get caught in my own attachment to outcomes.
Of course. And I mean, a lot of times that's how theory and practice works, like in a lot of ways, especially in teaching.
Well, of course, because there's the measurement of the outcomes, right? Yeah. Which, I mean, I've done some teaching as well. And it's very hard if your students, aren't managing to not feel that you're failing. Very, very difficult. Even though that you may know this is a systemic issue, there are many parts, each child is an individual and, brings their own gifts and challenges to the learning experience. Every child brings their own gifts and challenges to the learning experience. It's very hard not to, well, for me, but maybe that's just because I'm type A. I don't know what it's like for you.
No, I think that's true. I think that's true.
So, Kathryn, I am curious to see what happens nationally with education, because, as we were saying before we started speaking, before we started recording, we're not certain, right, about how kids will go back to school next year, and also hopefully we don't have another sudden spike in infections, which would then, necessitate a more stringent level of lockdown. But at the moment, we're in a position of relative ease, right? And even so, many children are not at school every day of the week, and there's the pressure of the necessary COVID protocols. So on teaching and learning, which we don't have time today to speak about, but that in itself is, I think, worthy of a further conversation, not only with yourself, but maybe a couple of teachers. So we should maybe think about whether or not we set up a conversation around that and what impact that's having on teaching and learning, and how people are then getting around that, not getting around it in order to not do the protocols, but how they, sort of working with those challenges effectively. But yeah, I hope that next year we see a surge in parent interest through groups such as yours, because that can only benefit parents and children and teachers. So no pressure on you, obviously, because the educational plan will do what it will do. But I'm very curious also to go and speak with the Telegram group people and also just see what's unfolded there. So
yeah, for sure. This is the nature of conversations like this. We could go back into like what we've been talking about before. When you look to the future and try and kind of extrapolate or like guess, how things might be, or hope for certain things, as soon as you say, well, I hope parents, I'm thinking then again about the chicken egg thing you were talking about earlier, like our parents, is it parents who are failing to step up and ask, or is it, where does the exclusion lie? And I'm very hesitant to really speak to anything into the future in terms of the bigger picture, because I feel I don't know what to say. But I'm a little, not anxious or not. I'm curious to see, and I'm wondering what we'll see in that way. I there's a part of me that is not sure that there was enough, that it was even enough now this year that would not, that the kind of, sorry, that's a very badly put. I'm wondering.
It's very hard to construct all of one's thoughts on the go when one's,
Let me try that again. The editor can edit it out.
Or not, depending on your preference, because I'm like, I've decided when I lose my train of thought, I'm going to forgive myself.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So this question about like, how will things look? Will it be different? And I'm maybe a bit cynical. I'm a little worried that things won't change that much, and that there will be a bit of a, maybe not a regression, but just that it'll be like, this was COVID time. Now let's go back to how it is, which is that the kids go to school and we don't really know what goes on there. You know, like just the idea that things might become like might just kind of go back to that. But one can always be hopeful. And so I'm glad you said the word hope, because it makes me think like, oh no, Katie, you can't just assume that, and you can't just be like, oh well, they're just gonna go back to that, you know. So yeah, I'm glad you said that, and I also hope that, but I also hope that it goes both ways, because I don't think it's parents coming, you know, reaching out and asking for it. I think that what I care about, and what is big professionally for me, is this connection between parents and teachers, and parents and schools, and the fact that it goes both ways, and that that continuity and integration is important for me. So
yeah, and how,
I do hope.
How one facilitates the relationship for parents. Can you hear my cat in the background?
Yeah.
It's that time of day, so we'll probably have to end soon so I can go feed him. Otherwise, this will carry on incessantly. But how one facilitates the connection for parents between, the parent and the child's learning experience is, possibly a very difficult question for teachers to be considering when they are really having to be very focused on their own, what's happening in the classroom and all the pressures around that, especially given how much teaching and learning time has actually been lost.
Yeah.
So I also,
and I mean, sorry, finish.
I also am concerned, and we can't speak about this now, otherwise the cat will starve and let us know about it, but also we'll never finish. But I am both concerned and curious about what we will see play out as children progress to the next grade, because obviously we need to progress as many children as we can, both from a system point of view, an economic point of view, as well as obviously from the point of view of the child. But what skills and knowledge they didn't manage to pick up, or that wasn't adequately consolidated because of the lack of teaching and learning time, is going to be putting a lot of pressure on teachers next year, especially, as well as on the children. So I don't know if you're already seeing that with the children in your own class, and whether or not your school's even thinking about that.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I was going to say, like, what we're talking about now, would sort of feeds into the last conversation, like the conversation about kind of my specific background in education, the kind of school I work at, the radio approach, the parent community connection that we try and build at the school that I work at. But for sure, we are struggling with that in a way that I think is very different to what bigger schools and government schools would be struggling with, but it's still there. Yeah, I mean, it is big. I mean, in the simplest way, and I'm not trying to kind of fix anything, but I think that the kind of thinking about like learning as a flow, the kids will grow, the kids will get older, the kids will move to adulthood, and there will be a flow of learning through that time, and there may be more obstacles, there may be less movement, there may be, and there will be inequality, unfortunately.
There's always inequality.
It will go on.
No, it will go on. It's not about to collapse.
Yeah, exactly.
It will go on.
Yeah.
So we're not. Yeah.
And so you just have to go on, and support each other as best as possible.
I'm hoping that if I let him see the screen, he'll be less cross. But no, he's looking very cross. Okay, I'm going to have to wrap it up, and I think it's also a good point to wrap it up. Leave whoever watches with the mantra of "it will go on," which is a very positive and pragmatic and factual statement all in one. So thanks for that. And thank you for your willingness to speak, especially late on a Friday afternoon after a tough week in the classroom. And I truly hope we'll have another opportunity to have another conversation about some of at least one of the topics that we've touched on today, if not more of them. So thank you.
Yeah, such a pleasure. Thanks so much. That was really fun.
Cool.
It was good to see you again.
Yeah, it's always lovely seeing you, Kathryn.
Bye.
Have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks.
Okay, bye-bye.